The winter wind whistled through Vermont's snow-covered mountains as Mason Wheeler stared out the bulletproof windows of Evergreen Estate. At 6 years old, he knew every inch of his gilded prison, the marble columns supporting vaulted ceilings, the imported furniture arranged with mathematical precision, and the electronic wheelchair that had become an extension of himself. The partial paralysis affecting his lower body was just another fact of his existence, like the absence of his mother or the perpetual silence that hung in the air. "Time for physical therapy, Mason," announced Nurse Davis, checking her watch. With practiced efficiency, Mason nodded without enthusiasm. His daily schedule ran like clockwork. Breakfast at 7 a.m., tutoring via video conferencing at 9 a.m., physical therapy at 11 a.m., lunch at 12:30 p.m., each minute of his day carefully orchestrated by the army of specialists his father employed. Richard Wheeler, tech mogul and founder of Wheeler Innovations, had transformed grief into control after his wife Catherine died during childbirth. The man who once smiled freely in old photographs now moved through life with rigid determination, building an impenetrable fortress of luxury and medical expertise around his only son. "Your father asked about your progress report," Nurse Davis mentioned as she helped Mason onto the therapy mat. "He'll be calling from Seattle this evening." Mason didn't respond. His father's calls followed the same script: polite inquiries about his health, reminders about the importance of his exercises, awkward silences, and promises to visit soon. But Richard Wheeler's visits were as predictable as they were brief, filled with specialists' consultations and business calls taken in adjoining rooms. As Mason went through the motions of his exercises, his gaze drifted toward the snow-covered grounds outside. Beyond the manicured gardens and security perimeter lay forests and mountains he'd only seen in pictures, a world of endless possibility that seemed as unreachable as the stars. "Very good, Mason. 5 more repetitions," encouraged Dr. Hopkins, the physical therapist who visited 3 times weekly. Mason complied automatically while his mind wandered. In his dreams, he could run through those forests. In his imagination, he had friends who didn't wear white coats or carry clipboards. In his heart, he longed for something no amount of his father's money could buy: genuine connection. Later that afternoon, as Mason sat in the estate's library with his remote tutor lecturing about fractions through a screen, a movement outside caught his eye. Someone was moving along the perimeter fence. "Mason, are you paying attention?" Ms. Winters, his tutor, asked through the screen. "Yes, Ms. Winters," he replied automatically, though his eyes remained fixed on the figure outside, small and determined, working their way around the security system with surprising skill. After his lesson ended, Mason wheeled himself closer to the window. The figure was gone, but his curiosity remained piqued, the first spontaneous feeling he'd experienced in weeks. That night, after Nurse Davis had checked his monitors and turned out the lights, Mason lay awake, thinking about the mysterious visitor. His bedroom, like everything in Evergreen Estate, was designed for maximum comfort and security. Sensors monitored his heart rate and breathing, cameras observed from discreet corners, and an intercom system allowed staff to respond to his needs. Instantly, the security provided everything except what he truly needed: freedom. A soft scraping sound from his balcony door startled Mason fully awake. The sound came again, more insistent this time. Mason hesitated, then slowly pushed himself up and reached for the remote control that operated his motorized wheelchair. The balcony doors were kept locked, another safety measure, but as Mason approached, he saw small fingers working at the edge of the doorframe. With a click that seemed thunderous in the quiet room, the lock disengaged, and the door slid open just enough for a small figure to slip through. Moonlight illuminated the intruder, a girl about his age with wild brown hair escaping from a knit cap, worn jeans with patches at the knees, and bright, intelligent eyes that assessed him without a trace of pity. "You're awake," she whispered, closing the door behind her. "That makes things easier." Mason stared, momentarily speechless. No one had ever broken into Evergreen Estate. It was supposed to be impossible. "How did you," he began, "get in?" She grinned, revealing a gap where a front tooth was missing. "Your security system is good, but it's designed to keep out adults. I'm small." She shrugged off her backpack and began unwinding her scarf. "I'm Ellie, by the way. Ellie Markham." "You shouldn't be here," Mason finally managed to say, though he made no move to call for help. "There are cameras everywhere." "Not everywhere," Ellie replied, confidently. "And I looped the feed on the ones I passed. Your system has a backdoor, did you know that?" Mason shook his head, fascinated despite himself. "Why are you here?" he asked. Ellie approached his wheelchair without hesitation, circling it with curious eyes before meeting his gaze directly. "I saw you watching from the window today," she explained. "You looked sad and lonely." She paused, then added matter-of-factly, "I know what that's like." Something in her directness disarmed Mason completely. No one in his carefully curated world ever spoke to him with such honesty. "Do you want to play a game, or just sit there staring?" Ellie asked, pulling a small pouch from her pocket. She emptied it on his bedside table, revealing a collection of smooth stones in various colors. "These are special," she explained, selecting a blue-green stone and placing it in his palm. "They help you be brave, but only if you really believe." Mason looked down at the stone, cool and solid in his hand. "I don't play games," he said softly. "I have therapeutic activities." Ellie's laugh was unexpected and bright. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," she declared. "Everyone plays games. It's like breathing. You just forgot how." She dragged a chair closer to his wheelchair, sat cross-legged on it, and began arranging the stones in patterns. "This is the kingdom of Evermore," she explained, creating an outer circle. "These blue ones are the ocean, the green ones are forests, and this big red one in the middle—" She placed a rust-colored stone in the center. "That's us." Without fully understanding why, Mason found himself leaning forward, watching her hands move with certainty and imagination. When she handed him another stone and invited him to add to the kingdom, he hesitated only briefly before placing it carefully beside hers. They played for hours, creating elaborate stories about the Stone Kingdom. For the first time in memory, Mason forgot about his scheduled medications, his monitoring devices, and the constant awareness of his limitations. With Ellie, he wasn't patient MW or Richard Wheeler's unfortunate son. He was just Mason, co-ruler of a stone kingdom, with mountains made of pillows and rivers of moonlight streaming through the windows. When the eastern sky began to lighten, Ellie gathered her stones and returned them to her pouch. "I have to go before the shift change," she said, referencing the security rotation with surprising knowledge. "But I'll come back." "You can't," Mason protested, though his heart rebelled against his words. "If they catch you, or they won't," Ellie assured him with the unshakable confidence of childhood. She hesitated, then placed the blue-green stone back in his hand, closing his fingers around it. "Keep this until next time, for courage." Before Mason could respond, she had slipped back through the balcony door and disappeared into the pre-dawn shadows, leaving nothing but the stone and a lingering sense of wonder to prove she had been there at all. Mason clutched the stone tightly and watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring within him, something dangerously like hope. Nurse Davis noticed the change in Mason immediately. The boy, who had passively accepted his routines for years, suddenly showed interest in his surroundings. During physical therapy, he asked questions about muscle groups and requested to try more challenging exercises. At mealtimes, he ate with newfound enthusiasm. Most surprisingly, he asked for art supplies, something he hadn't shown interest in since he was a toddler. "I'd like to document his progress," Dr. Hopkins told Richard Wheeler during their weekly conference call. "It's quite remarkable." Richard frowned at the screen, lines of concern etching deeper into his face. "Any indication of what triggered this change?" "Children are resilient, Mr. Wheeler," Dr. Hopkins replied diplomatically. "Sometimes progress happens in unexpected bursts." Richard nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Increase security monitoring. I want to know if anything unusual happens." For 2 weeks, Ellie's nighttime visits continued undetected. She would appear after midnight, always bringing something new: smooth stones from the river, interesting leaves or small mechanical parts she'd salvaged from discarded electronics. Mason kept these treasures hidden beneath his mattress, tangible proof that her visits weren't just elaborate dreams. Each night, their imaginary kingdom grew more complex. Mason began contributing his own ideas, engineering solutions for imaginary bridges and designing defense systems for their stone castle. "You'd make a good architect," Ellie remarked one night, as Mason carefully balanced a structure of pencils and erasers. "My father wants me to take over his company someday," Mason replied, the weight of expectation evident in his voice. Ellie wrinkled her nose. "But what do you want?" The question startled Mason. No one had ever asked him that before. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never thought about it." Ellie's eyes widened in disbelief. "Everyone should know what they want." She pulled her knees up to her chest, studying him thoughtfully. "Well, you have time to figure it out. That's what being a kid is for." "Is that what you're doing? Figuring things out?" Something flickered across Ellie's face, a shadow of something beyond her years. "Something like that," she answered vaguely. Mason had learned not to press when Ellie grew quiet about her life outside Evergreen Estate. She deflected personal questions with practiced ease, changing subjects or inventing new games to distract him. All he knew was that she lived nearby and was good at getting around. On the 18th night, their routine was disrupted by an unexpected security drill. Mason was startled awake by flashing lights and an automated voice announcing, "Security Protocol Alpha engaged. All residents remain in designated safe areas." Mason's heart raced as he maneuvered his wheelchair toward the balcony where Ellie usually appeared. Before he could reach it, his bedroom door opened and Nurse Davis rushed in. "Nothing to worry about, Mason," she assured him, though her tight expression suggested otherwise. "Your father ordered an unscheduled security drill. Let's get you to the safe room." Mason glanced desperately toward the balcony, thinking of Ellie potentially walking into a security sweep. "Can I get my book from the shelf first?" he asked, trying to buy time. "The security team will bring anything you need," Nurse Davis replied firmly, already guiding his wheelchair toward the door. For the next 2 hours, Mason sat in the estate's reinforced safe room, listening to security personnel report their findings over the intercom system. His anxiety mounted with each sector clear announcement, wondering if Ellie had been caught or had managed to escape. When the all clear finally sounded and Mason returned to his room, he found nothing out of place. No sign of Ellie. No way of knowing if she was safe. The following night he waited anxiously, clutching the blue-green stone she had given him. Hours passed with no sign of her. By dawn, Mason had convinced himself that the security drill had scared her away permanently, or worse. She had been caught and was now in trouble because of him. 3 sleepless nights followed. Mason's newfound enthusiasm dimmed. He retreated into himself again, responding to questions with minimal words and showing little interest in his therapy exercises. The stone remained hidden under his pillow, the last tangible connection to his only friend. On the 4th night, just as Mason was drifting into troubled sleep, a familiar sound at the balcony door jolted him awake. Ellie slipped inside, her usual confidence replaced by caution. "I couldn't come," she whispered, settling cross-legged on the floor beside his bed. "They changed the security protocols. It took me days to figure out the new patterns." Relief washed over Mason. "I thought you weren't coming back." "I promised I would," Ellie said simply, as if that explained everything. Mason noticed a bandage on her arm. "What happened?" "Got caught on some wire," she replied dismissively. "It's nothing." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small mechanical device. "Look what I made for you." It was a modified remote control with extra buttons and a small display screen. "It can control your wheelchair better than the standard remote," she explained, "and it has a few extra features." Mason examined it with growing amazement. "You built this?" "I'm good with electronics," Ellie said with a shrug. "My dad taught me before." She stopped abruptly, then continued in a deliberately lighter tone. "Anyway, press the green button." Mason did, and the device projected a small hologram of their stone kingdom onto his bedspread. "How did you—" "I scanned it last time I was here," Ellie explained. "Now you can see it even when I'm not around." The thoughtfulness of the gift left Mason speechless. No one had ever created something specifically for him, not his father with all his resources, not the specialists with their advanced degrees. "There's another button," Ellie prompted, nodding toward the device. "The blue one." Mason pressed it, and a secure communication channel opened on the small screen. "So we can talk when I can't come," Ellie explained. "It piggybacks on your house system but stays under the radar. If my father finds out—" "He won't," Ellie assured him. "Trust me, I'm very careful." That night, Ellie taught Mason how to use the device while sharing stories about the outside world, the changing seasons, the town's preparations for the local festival, the stars visible without the estate's security lights washing them out. "You should see it all yourself," she said suddenly, "not just hear about it." Mason gestured toward his wheelchair. "I can't exactly sneak out." Ellie studied him thoughtfully. "Your chair has a power boost capability. It's built into the motor but deactivated in the settings. With my modifications, you could navigate rougher terrain." She held his gaze steadily. "The question is, are you brave enough to try?" The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Mason had never left Evergreen Estate except for carefully planned medical appointments in his father's private vehicles with security personnel flanking him at all times. "My father would—" "Not know," Ellie interrupted. "We'd go when the security shift changes. 1 hour, that's all. Just to see the sunset from the ridge. No one would know you were gone." Mason's fingers found the blue-green stone in his pocket. "For courage," she had said. He looked at Ellie, this girl who climbed security fences and built holographic projectors from salvaged parts, who had somehow become his first and only friend. "When?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Ellie's face broke into a radiant smile. "Tomorrow night. The security chief is taking his weekly video call with the Vermont team at exactly 8:17 p.m. We'll have a 14-minute window to get through the east gate." Mason nodded, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Tomorrow night," he agreed. The following day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Mason went through his routines mechanically, anxiety building with each passing hour. By dinner he could barely eat, his thoughts consumed with what lay ahead. At precisely 8:15 p.m., Mason's modified wheelchair moved silently through the dimly lit corridors of Evergreen Estate. Ellie had mapped the blind spots in the security system and communicated them through the device she'd given him. When he reached the garden entrance, she was waiting, a backpack slung over her shoulder. "Ready?" she whispered, eyes bright with excitement. Mason nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. This was it, his first act of true rebellion, his first taste of freedom. Ellie operated her device, temporarily looping the security camera feeds. "We have exactly 12 minutes before the system refreshes," she explained, guiding him toward the service gate. The gates parted with surprising ease, another of Ellie's electronic tricks, and suddenly they were outside the perimeter. No alarms sounded, no security guards appeared, just the cool evening air against Mason's face unfiltered by bulletproof glass. "This way," Ellie urged, leading him up a path through the woods. The wheelchair's enhanced motor handled the terrain, with unexpected ease, climbing the gentle slope toward the ridgeline. When they reached the summit, Mason gasped. Below them, the valley stretched out in magnificent panorama, a tapestry of forests, small farms, and the distant glow of Burlington. Lights. Above, the first stars were appearing in a sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. "What do you think?" Ellie asked, watching his face. "It's—" Mason struggled to find words adequate for the moment. "It's everything." Ellie smiled, satisfied with his response. She sat beside his wheelchair, their shoulders touching companionably as they watched the sun make its final descent behind the green mountains. "I come here every night," she confessed softly. "It helps me remember that the world is bigger than my problems." Mason looked at her profile, gilded by the fading light. "What problems?" Ellie hesitated, then sighed. My parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. I live with my aunt now. She picked up a small stone and turned it over in her hands. She's not really good at being a parent. Sometimes she forgets things, like food, or that I need clothes for school. Understanding dawned on Mason. The patched clothes, the thin frame, the resourcefulness that went beyond natural aptitude. Ellie had learned to survive. That's why you learn to get around security systems, he realized aloud. Ellie nodded, not meeting his eyes. You do what you have to do. Grocery stores, department stores, they all have blind spots if you know where to look. Mason absorbed this revelation, seeing Ellie in a new light. You could tell someone, get help. And go where? Ellie challenged. Foster care, an institution? No thanks. She shrugged. Besides, I'm managing. I've got the Ridge, the Stone Kingdom, and now, she bumped his shoulder with hers, I've got you. Mason felt something shift inside him, a fundamental realignment of perspective. His whole life had been defined by what he couldn't do, by his limitations and losses. But Ellie, who had lost even more, defined herself by her freedom and resourcefulness. We should head back, Ellie said, checking her watch. We've got 4 minutes before the security refresh. As they made their way back down the path, Mason knew something had changed irrevocably. The estate that had once been his entire world now seemed smaller, more confined. The taste of freedom, however brief, had awoken something within him that could never be put back to sleep. They slipped back through the service gate with 1 minute to spare. At the garden entrance, Ellie stopped. Tomorrow night? She asked, sounding uncharacteristically uncertain. Mason nodded firmly. Tomorrow night. As he wheeled himself back to his room, Mason's mind was racing with possibilities he'd never before considered. For the first time, he wasn't just a patient to be treated or an heir to be protected. He was a person with choices, with agency. With one short taste of freedom, everything had changed. Richard Wheeler's jet touched down at Burlington International Airport 3 days earlier than scheduled. The quarterly board meeting in Seattle had concluded ahead of time, but that wasn't the reason for his premature return. It was the unsettling report from Dr. Hopkins. Mason's brain activity showed patterns consistent with increased stress and excitement during nighttime hours, precisely when the boy should have been sleeping. The security team found nothing unusual on the cameras, his head of security reported, as Richard's car wound through the mountain roads toward Evergreen Estate. But we've installed additional monitoring as requested. Richard nodded absently, reviewing Mason's medical charts on his tablet. The improvements in his son's physical condition were undeniable: increased muscle tone, better appetite, heightened cognitive engagement. Under normal circumstances, these would be cause for celebration. But Richard Wheeler hadn't built a technology empire by ignoring anomalies, and Mason's sudden progress definitely qualified as one. At Evergreen Estate, Richard bypassed his usual routine of checking in with staff and went directly to Mason's suite. He found his son at the window, staring at the mountains with an intensity Richard didn't recognize. "Mason," he said, announcing his presence. The boy turned, a flicker of something, alarm, guilt, crossing his features before his expression, settled into polite neutrality. "Father, you're back early." Richard studied his son carefully. There was something different about him, a certain alertness, a presence that hadn't been there before. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," Mason replied. "Dr. Hopkins says my core strength has improved 15%, so I've heard." Richard moved closer, noting the way Mason's hands rested protectively over something in his lap. A sketchbook, he realized. "May I?" Mason hesitated before handing it over. Richard opened it to find detailed drawings of landscapes, mechanical designs, and a recurring motif of circular stone patterns. "These are quite good," Richard commented, genuinely impressed. "When did you start drawing again?" "Recently," Mason answered vaguely. "It helps with fine motor control." Richard nodded, continuing to flip through the pages until he came across a drawing that made him stop. It was a portrait, skillfully, rendered despite Mason's limited experience, of a young girl with wild hair and determined eyes. "Who is this?" Richard asked, keeping his tone carefully neutral. Mason's expression closed like a shutter. "Just someone I imagined." Richard studied the drawing more closely. The details were too specific for an imaginary person. The gap in the front teeth, the particular pattern of freckles across the nose, the scar above one eyebrow. This was someone Mason had seen, someone real. "I think we should increase your therapy sessions," Richard said finally, closing the sketchbook. "Dr. Hopkins mentioned you've been showing interest in more challenging exercises." Relief flickered across Mason's face at the change of subject. "Yes, I want to get stronger." Richard placed the sketchbook on the bedside table and sat down in the chair beside Mason's wheelchair. For a moment, father and son regarded each other in silence, two strangers connected by blood but separated by grief and years of carefully maintained distance. "Mason," Richard began, uncharacteristic, uncertainty in his voice. "Are you happy here?" The question caught Mason off guard. His father had always been concerned with his health, his education, his future, but happiness had never entered the equation before. "I have everything I need," Mason answered diplomatically. Richard nodded, recognizing the evasion but choosing not to press. "If there's ever anything you want to tell me," he offered awkwardly. Mason looked at his father, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. Behind the crisp suit and carefully controlled expression, he saw something unexpected: fear. His powerful, confident father was afraid. "I know, Father," Mason replied softly. That night, after the house had settled into its nighttime rhythm, Mason waited anxiously for Ellie. His father's unexpected return and his interest in the sketchbook had left Mason unsettled. When Ellie finally appeared at the balcony door, Mason immediately pulled her inside. "My father's back," he whispered urgently. "He saw your drawing in my sketchbook." Ellie's eyes widened. "Did he recognize me?" "How could he? He's never seen you." "Right," Ellie said, relaxing slightly. "But we should be more careful. Skip tomorrow night, maybe." Mason shook his head firmly. "No, I've been thinking about something." He wheeled over to his computer and pulled up a file. "I found this in my father's archives, the original blueprints for my physical therapy equipment." Ellie examined the technical drawings with interest. "These are incredible. Your father designed these himself?" "Yes. Before Wheeler Innovations focused on security systems, they specialized in medical technology." Mason pointed to a particular section of the blueprint. "Look at this component. It's a neural interface system designed to enhance the chief's connection between brain signals and muscle response." Ellie studied the diagrams, her expression growing increasingly excited. "This could help you walk," she breathed. "Theoretically," Mason confirmed. "But my father abandoned the project years ago. The doctors said it was too experimental, the risk of complications too high." "But you think it could work?" Ellie surmised, studying his face. Mason nodded. "With some modifications, the technology has advanced significantly since these were designed. If we could update the interface..." "We?" Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Mason, I'm good with electronics, but this is medical equipment. One mistake could hurt you." "I know the risks," Mason said firmly, "but I've been doing research. Combined with the physical therapy I've been doing, this could help me stand, maybe even take a few steps without support." Ellie was silent for a long moment, her expression troubled. "Why now?" she finally asked. "You've had these blueprints all along. Why try this now?" Mason's answer was simple: "Because now I have something worth standing up for." The intensity in his voice made Ellie look away, her cheeks flushing slightly. When she met his gaze again, her expression was resolved. "Okay, tell me what you need." Over the next 2 weeks, Mason and Ellie worked on modifying his existing therapy equipment. During the day, Mason pushed himself harder than ever in his official sessions, building strength and control. At night, Ellie brought components she'd found in electronics stores and repair shops, helping Mason assemble their prototype. The device they were creating was a sleeve that would fit over Mason's legs, with sensors that would enhance the neural signals from his brain to his partially paralyzed muscles. If it worked, it could bridge the gap in his damaged nervous system, allowing him temporary but improved mobility. "It's ready," Ellie announced one night, making the final adjustment to the circuitry. "Should we test it?" Mason nodded, his throat suddenly dry with anticipation. They had conducted small tests on individual components, but this would be the first full system test. Ellie helped him attach the sleeve to his legs, carefully aligning the sensors with the marked points on his skin. "Remember," she cautioned, "start with minimal power. We can adjust up gradually." Mason nodded, positioning himself beside his bed, with the support bars they had installed within reach. He activated the system with the modified remote Ellie had given him. The sensation was immediate, a warm tingling spreading through his legs, followed by an awareness of muscles he normally couldn't feel. Moving with careful deliberation, Mason gripped the support bars and willed his legs to support his weight. For one breathtaking moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, his muscles responded. With trembling effort, Mason rose from his wheelchair, standing unsteadily on his own feet for the first time in years. "Mason!" Ellie gasped, her hands hovering nearby without touching him, letting him achieve this moment independently. Tears streamed down Mason's face as he stood, shaking with effort but upright. It wouldn't last long. The system was designed for short bursts of use to prevent muscle fatigue and neural overload, but in that moment, standing beside his bed with Ellie's astonished eyes upon him, Mason Wheeler felt invincible. "I'm doing it," he whispered, hardly daring to speak louder for fear of breaking the spell. "Ellie, I'm standing." "Try a step," she encouraged softly. "Just one." Focusing with all his concentration, Mason willed his right foot to move forward. The motion was jerky and uncertain, but his foot did lift and move forward a few inches. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. "That's enough for tonight," Ellie said, moving closer as the system began to power down automatically. "Your muscles need time to adjust." As she helped him back into his wheelchair, Mason's mind was racing with possibilities. With practice and refinement, the device could give him increasing mobility. Not a complete cure, but a bridge toward independence he'd never thought possible. "No one can know about this," Mason said as Ellie packed away their equipment. "Not until we've perfected it. My father would shut it down immediately if he knew we were experimenting with untested medical technology." Ellie nodded in agreement, though something in her expression caught Mason's attention. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "My aunt's boyfriend found out about your estate, that I've been coming here. He wants..." she faltered. "He wants me to help him get inside. Says a place like this must have valuables worth taking." Mason felt cold fear settle in his stomach. "What did you tell him?" "That he's crazy. That this place has security I couldn't possibly bypass." She laughed humorlessly. He didn't like that answer. Mason noticed for the first time the fading bruise on Ellie's jaw, partially concealed by her hair. "He hurt you," he said, voice tight with anger. "It's not the first time," Ellie admitted quietly, "but I'm handling it. I always do." "You could stay here," Mason suggested impulsively. "In one of the guest suites. No one uses them." Ellie shook her head. "And how would you explain my presence to your father? To the staff? Besides, my aunt would report me missing the moment she realized she'd lose her government checks." Frustration and helplessness washed over Mason. With all his father's resources, all the privilege of Evergreen Estate, he couldn't offer Ellie the one thing she truly needed: safety. "Unless..." "What if we told my father the truth?" Mason suggested, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "About you, about how you've been helping me. He might be angry at first, but when he sees what we've accomplished with the neural interface..." "No," Ellie interrupted firmly. "Adults don't understand. They make everything complicated." She began gathering her things with quick, efficient movements. "I should go, it's getting late." "Ellie, wait." Mason reached for her hand. "We need to figure this out together. You're not alone anymore." She paused, conflict evident in her expression. I've always been alone, Mason. It's safer that way. Not anymore, Mason insisted. Tomorrow night I'll show you something that might change your mind. Curiosity flickered across her face. What? Just trust me, Mason said. Meet me at the east gate at our usual time. After Ellie left, Mason wheeled himself to his computer and began working with renewed purpose. If his plan was going to succeed, he would need evidence, irrefutable proof of what they had accomplished together and what it could mean for others with conditions like his. The following evening, Mason waited anxiously by the east gate, the neural interface sleeve concealed beneath his clothes. He had recorded a video demonstration earlier, documenting the device's function and its effects on his mobility. When Ellie appeared, her backpack seemed fuller than usual, and something about her demeanor struck Mason as different. A tension in her shoulders, a guardedness in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Nothing," she replied too quickly. "What did you want to show me?" Mason studied her for a moment longer before activating his modified wheelchair to follow the now familiar path to the ridge. When they reached the summit, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the valley in warm golden light. "This is where I first understood what freedom really meant," Mason said, positioning his chair at their favorite viewpoint. "And this is where I want to show you what's possible when we work together." With careful movements, Mason activated the neural interface system and gripped the handles he had installed on his wheelchair. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself to a standing position. Ellie's eyes widened. "Mason, you shouldn't be trying this without support bars." "Watch," he interrupted, focusing intently on maintaining his balance. With excruciating effort, Mason took one step forward, then another. 5 shaky steps brought him to the large flat rock where they often sat. Trembling with exertion, he lowered himself onto the rock's surface. "You did it," Ellie whispered, awe and pride mingling in her voice. "You actually walked." "We did it," Mason corrected, breathing heavily from the effort. "I couldn't have done this without you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device, a secure data drive. "This contains everything, the blueprints, our modifications, video documentation of my progress. With this, we can prove that the system works." "Why are you giving this to me?" Ellie asked, confusion evident in her expression. "Because I trust you," Mason replied simply, "and because I want you to understand what we've created together. This isn't just about helping me walk. This technology could help thousands of people with similar conditions." Ellie took the drive hesitantly. "Mason, A sudden noise in the underbrush cut her off. They both froze, listening intently. The sound came again, a deliberate movement among the trees. "We need to go," Ellie whispered urgently. "Now." Mason nodded, quickly deactivating the neural interface and returning to his wheelchair. As they turned to leave, a figure stepped out from the shadows. A man in his 30s with sharp features and cold eyes. "Well, well," he drawled, blocking their path, "if it isn't my little genius and her rich friend." Mason felt Ellie stiffen beside him. "Tyler," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" "Following you," the man replied, his gaze sliding to Mason with predatory assessment. "Thought I'd see what was so special about this place you've been sneaking off to." His eyes narrowed on Mason's wheelchair. "Wheeler's kid, right? The crippled heir to the throne." Mason felt a chill run down his spine. This must be the aunt's boyfriend Ellie had mentioned, the one who wanted access to the estate. "You need to leave," Mason said, trying to sound authoritative despite his vulnerable position. "This is private property." Tyler laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "That's the point, rich boy. Private property usually means valuable property." He took a step closer, his attention shifting back to Ellie. "And you're going to help me get inside?" "No," Ellie said firmly, stepping protectively in front of Mason's wheelchair. "I told you before, it's impossible." "Funny thing about that," Tyler replied, his voice dangerously soft. "I don't believe you anymore. Not after watching. You bypassed that fancy gate like it was nothing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Got it all on video. The security company might find it interesting. Or maybe the police, trespassing, breaking and entering. Serious charges for a kid already on probation. Mason looked at Ellie in shock. Probation? Ellie's face had gone pale. It wasn't like that. Shoplifting, Tyler supplied with mock helpfulness. Electronics store. Got caught with components that look suspiciously like the ones in that fancy device on the rich kid's legs. He grinned. Didn't share that detail, did she? Mason felt a momentary doubt, quickly replaced by understanding. The components for their neural interface. Of course, Ellie couldn't have afforded them legitimately. She'd risked legal trouble to help him. It doesn't matter, Mason said firmly. Leave her alone. Tyler's expression hardened. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get us inside that fancy house. We take what we can carry, cash, jewelry, electronics, and disappear. Nobody gets hurt. And if we refuse? Mason challenged. Tyler's smile was cold. Then I send this video to the police. Your daddy finds out about your little girlfriend breaking into his fortress, and Ellie here gets sent to juvenile detention. Her probation officer won't be too happy about these new activities. Mason's mind raced, searching for a solution. He couldn't let Ellie be hurt or sent away because of him, but letting Tyler into the estate was unthinkable, not just because of the theft, but because of what might happen if the man discovered the full extent of Wheeler Innovations' technology. There's another option, Mason said suddenly. My father keeps a safe in his office at the boathouse. Easier to access than the main house, less security, and it usually has cash and valuables inside. Tyler's eyes narrowed suspiciously. And you'd just give us the combination? To protect? Hella yes. Mason met the man's gaze steadily. But only if you delete that video and leave her alone afterward. For a long moment, Tyler studied him, weighing the offer. Finally, he nodded. The boathouse, tonight. You get us in, open the safe, then we go our separate ways. Give me your phone, Mason demanded. Delete the video now. Tyler laughed. Insurance policy, kid, after we're done. Mason looked at Ellie, hoping to communicate a silent message. Trust me, I have a plan. Fine, he agreed reluctantly. Midnight. The boathouse at the north end of the property. Tyler's smile was triumphant. Smart choice, rich boy. Midnight it is. As he walked away, disappearing into the trees, Ellie rounded on Mason. Are you insane? There is no safe in any boathouse. I know, Mason replied calmly. But there is a security outpost disguised as a boathouse, and my father will be monitoring the cameras tonight. He always does when he first returns from trips. Understanding dawned on Ellie's face. You're setting him up. It's the only way to protect you, Mason said simply. Tyler will be caught trespassing. The security team will find the video on his phone and you'll be safe. Ellie looked at him with an unreadable expression. You'd turn yourself in too? Let your father discover everything we've been doing. Mason nodded, certainty settling over him like a mantle. Some things are worth the risk. The digital clock on Mason's computer display showed 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes until the confrontation. At the boathouse, his heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination as he made his final preparations. The security team has been notified, he told Ellie, who paced anxiously by the window. They'll be hidden around the boathouse when Tyler arrives. Ellie stopped pacing, her expression conflicted. And what about us? What happens when your father realizes I've been sneaking in for weeks, when he discovers what we've built together? Mason took a deep breath. I'll tell him everything. How you helped me, how the neural interface is working. He'll understand once he sees the results. You really believe that? Ellie asked, skepticism clear in her voice. I have to, Mason replied simply. He looked down at the neural interface controller in his hands. It's time to stop hiding. With careful movements, Mason activated the device, feeling the now familiar sensation of warmth and connection flowing through his legs. He gripped the handles of his wheelchair and slowly, deliberately, stood up. Mason, Ellie began. Worry, evident in her tone. I need to do this, he insisted, taking his first unsupported step toward her. When my father sees me standing, walking, he'll have to acknowledge what we've accomplished. 6 painstaking steps brought him directly in front of Ellie. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort, but determination shone in his eyes. I'm ready, he said with quiet certainty. The journey to the boathouse took longer than their usual. Nighttime excursions. Mason insisted on walking part of the way, using the wheelchair only when the terrain became too challenging. Every step was a declaration of independence, a physical manifestation of all he'd gained since meeting Ellie. As they approached the boathouse, the security team leader, a former military man named Collins, who had worked for the Wheelers for years, emerged from the shadows. Mr. Mason, he acknowledged with a nod, his surprise at seeing the boy partially standing controlled but evident. We're in position. Your father is monitoring from the main security hub. His gaze shifted to Ellie, recognition dawning. And this must be our mystery visitor. Mason stepped protectively in front of her. She's with me, Collins. She helped me create this. He gestured to the neural interface visible beneath his rolled-up pant legs. She's the reason I can stand right now. Collins studied them both for a moment, then nodded once. Your father wants to see you both. After we deal with the intruder. Remember, Mason said urgently, the man is dangerous, but he's also being manipulated. His primary target is the fictional safe. Understood, sir, Collins replied professionally, though his expression suggested he had many questions. Please, wait in the security blind. We'll handle the situation. Mason and Ellie moved to the designated area, a reinforced section of the boathouse hidden behind one-way glass, offering a clear view of the dock and entrance. Through carefully concealed speakers, they could hear the security team's communications. Subject approaching from the north perimeter, came a woman's voice through the system. On foot, moving cautiously. Minutes later, Tyler appeared at the edge of the property, scanning the area before advancing toward the boathouse. He moved with the practiced stealth of someone accustomed to avoiding detection, pausing occasionally to listen for any signs of security. Finding none, the Wheeler security team was too well trained to give away their positions. He approached the boathouse door and examined the lock. Where are the kids? He muttered to himself, checking his watch. Right on schedule, Collins's voice came through the speakers. Move on my mark. Mason felt Ellie tense beside him as the security team closed in silently on Tyler, who was now attempting to pick the boathouse lock. Now, Collins ordered. The team moved with coordinated precision. Within seconds, Tyler was surrounded by 4 security officers, his hands restrained behind his back. Tyler James Doyle, Collins stated, reading from a tablet. Multiple convictions for breaking and entering, assault, theft. Currently wanted for violating parole in New Hampshire. He looked up, his expression grim. You picked the wrong estate to target, Mr. Doyle. This is a setup, Tyler snarled, struggling against his restraints. His eyes darted around wildly before landing on the one-way glass where Mason and Ellie watched. Somehow sensing their presence, he directed his fury there. That little thief led me into a trap. Check her record. She's the criminal here. The police are on their way, Mr. Doyle, Collins continued calmly. They'll be particularly interested in the contents of your phone. Our systems detected video footage of this property. That's a serious offense. As the security team led Tyler away, Mason turned to Ellie, expecting relief. Instead, he found her eyes wide with fear. I need to go, she whispered frantically. Now, so before the police get here. Ellie, wait, Mason urged, catching her arm as she moved toward the exit. You don't need to run anymore. My father can help. You don't understand, she interrupted, her voice breaking. Tyler wasn't lying. I do have a record. I did steal those components. If the police run my name, then you'll have the best legal team in Vermont defending you, came a deep voice from the doorway. Mason and Ellie turned in unison to find Richard Wheeler standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the security lights. He stepped into the room, his calculating gaze taking in everything. Mason standing with partial support from his wheelchair, the neural interface visible on his legs, Ellie's defensive posture. "Father," Mason began, straightening as much as his limited strength would allow. "I can explain." Richard held up a hand, silencing him. For a long moment he simply observed his son standing, actually standing, before him. Something shifted in his expression, a complex emotion that Mason couldn't quite identify. "How long? Have you been working on this?" Richard finally asked, gesturing to the neural interface. "Almost 3 months," Mason answered. "It's based on your original designs from the medical division. We modified the neural mapping to accommodate the advances in..." "We?" Richard interrupted, his gaze moving to Ellie. The girl lifted her chin defiantly, though Mason could see the slight tremor in her hands. "I helped with the electronics," she stated. "Mason did the programming and calibration." Richard stepped closer, examining the device with professional interest. "The circuit design is elegant," he noted, "miniaturized in ways I hadn't considered." He looked at Ellie with new assessment. "Where did you learn electronics at this level?" "My father was an electrical engineer," she replied cautiously, "before the accident." Understanding dawned on Richard's face. "Eleanor Markham, David Markham's daughter." Ellie's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew my father?" "He interviewed for a position at Wheeler Innovations years ago. Brilliant man. I was sorry to hear about the accident." Richard's expression softened marginally. The police reports mentioned a daughter who survived. Mason watched this exchange with growing hope. His father wasn't angry. He was curious, engaged. This was Richard Wheeler, the innovator, not Richard Wheeler, the overprotective parent. "Father," Mason interjected, taking another shaky step forward, "what we've created works. Not perfectly, not permanently, but it works. I can stand, I can walk short distances. With further refinement, it could help thousands of people with similar conditions," Richard finished, his gaze now fixed on his son with an intensity that made Mason catch his breath. "Why didn't you come to me with this? Would you have listened?" Mason challenged gently. "Or would you have shut it down as too experimental, too risky, just like you did years ago?" Richard flinched slightly at the accusation, and for the first time Mason saw something he'd never expected: regret. "After your mother," Richard began, then paused, struggling to find words. "After Catherine died, I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too. Every decision I made was about minimizing risk, creating the safest possible environment. But that wasn't living," Mason said softly. "It was just existing." Richard's gaze moved between Mason and Ellie, something shifting in his expression. "And then you found someone who showed you the difference." Before Mason could respond, Collins appeared at the doorway. "So the police are here. They're asking about the girl as well." Ellie tensed, instinctively backing toward the exit. Richard noticed and made a swift decision. "Tell them we'll be right there. I need a moment with my son and his guest." After Collins departed, Richard turned to Ellie. "I understand you've been staying with your aunt since your parents' accident." Ellie nodded warily. "Child Services placed me there. She's my only living relative." "And how has that arrangement been working out?" Richard asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Ellie remained silent, her expression guarded. Mason moved closer to her, offering silent support. "Father," he said quietly, "Ellie needs help. Her aunt's boyfriend, Tyler, he's been..." Mason struggled to find the right words. "Hurting her," Richard finished, his voice hardening. "Yes, I saw the surveillance footage from the ridge." He turned to Ellie, his expression resolute. "No child should live in fear, Eleanor, especially not one with your remarkable abilities." "What are you saying?" Ellie asked cautiously. "I'm saying that Wheeler Innovations has an excellent legal team who can address your previous indiscretions," Richard replied diplomatically. "And I'm saying that Evergreen Estate has plenty of room for a young engineering prodigy who might be interested in a proper apprenticeship." Mason stared at his father in astonishment. "You're offering her a place to stay here?" "I'm offering her a future," Richard corrected. "If she wants it, the choice is hers." Ellie looked between them, suspicion and hope warring in her expression. Why would you do that for someone you just met? Someone who's been breaking into your home for months? Richard's answer was simple. Because you gave my son something I couldn't. He gestured to Mason's tentative stance. You gave him his freedom, and in doing so you may have unlocked a technology that could help countless others. He turned to face the window, looking out over the estate grounds. I built this place as a fortress, thinking I was protecting what mattered most. I didn't realize I was creating a prison for both of us. Mason felt tears stinging his eyes. In all his life, he had never heard his father speak with such vulnerability, such honesty. So what happens now? Ellie asked, still cautious but with a flicker of hope in her voice. Now, Richard replied, turning back to face them, we talk to the police. We explain the situation with your aunt and Tyler. We file for emergency custody while the courts sort things out. His eyes met Mason's. And then we get to work refining this neural interface technology properly, with adequate safety protocols and medical supervision. Mason could hardly believe what he was hearing. You mean continue our work, together? Richard nodded, a ghost of a smile on his usually stern face. With proper resources this time, no more stealing components, he added with a pointed look at Ellie, who had the grace to look abashed. Wheeler Innovations has an entire medical technology division that's been dormant for too long. For the first time since entering the room, Ellie smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. We could make it better, smaller, more responsive, maybe even integrated with a learning algorithm that adapts to individual. Neural patterns, Mason finished excitedly. Father, the applications are endless. Richard watched them, something like wonder crossing his features. You two are quite the team. The best, Mason agreed, reaching for Ellie's hand without thinking. She took it without hesitation, their fingers intertwining with the same easy confidence that had characterized their collaboration from the beginning. Richard observed this with a thoughtful expression before nodding decisively. Let's go speak with the police. Together. In the weeks that followed, Evergreen Estate underwent a transformation. The security system remained robust, but less oppressive. Windows that had been permanently sealed were modified to open, allowing fresh air and mountain breezes to fill rooms that had been stagnant for years. The most significant changes, however, were in the people who inhabited the estate. Mason spent less time in his wheelchair, as the refined neural interface, now properly tested and approved by medical professionals, allowed him increasing mobility. Richard split his time between Wheeler Innovations headquarters and home, prioritizing dinner with Mason and Ellie each evening. And Ellie granted temporary custody to Richard, while her aunt's fitness as a guardian was investigated, brought life to spaces that had been silent for too long. Her natural curiosity and engineering aptitude earned her a special scholarship to the prestigious Technical Academy in Burlington, where she quickly distinguished herself as a remarkable student. 6 months after the confrontation at the boathouse, Mason stood at the ridge overlooking the valley, using only a walking cane for support. The neural interface hummed quietly beneath his clothes, a constant reminder of how far he had come. Thought I'd find you here, Ellie said, joining him at the viewpoint. At 12, she had grown taller over the months, her once wild hair now neatly braided, though her eyes retained their fierce intelligence. Just thinking, Mason replied, smiling at her, about everything that's changed. Good changes, Ellie noted, settling on their usual rock. Your father's lawyer called. The judge granted the permanent guardianship petition. Mason's smile widened. So it's official. You're staying. Apparently, Ellie confirmed, trying to sound casual, though her joy was evident. The court decided a technology mogul with unlimited resources and a house full of adaptive equipment was a more suitable guardian for a kid with my unique circumstances than an aunt who couldn't remember to buy groceries. Mason laughed. I think it was your unique brain that convinced the judge. The scholarship to Burlington Tech didn't hurt either. Neither did your father's legal team, Ellie added wryly. They fell into comfortable silence watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, the same colors that had captivated them on their first journey beyond the estate's walls. I have something for you, Mason said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and handed it to Ellie. She opened it curiously, tipping the contents into her palm. There lay the blue-green stone she had given him on their first night together, now set in a simple silver pendant. "You kept it all this time?" she asked softly. Mason nodded. "For courage, remember? I thought you might want it back now that we're officially family." Ellie's fingers closed around the stone, her expression solemn. "Not just because of the guardianship papers," she said, quietly. "We were family before that." "From the first night you broke into my room," Mason agreed with a grin. "And found the most boring kid in Vermont," Ellie teased, the familiar banter a comfortable rhythm between them. "Who's boring now?" Mason challenged, tapping his walking cane. "I'd say we've had enough excitement for a lifetime." "Oh, we're just getting started," Ellie replied, her eyes alight with the same determination that had first drawn Mason to her. She fastened the pendant around her neck, the stone catching the fading sunlight. "Wheeler Innovations' Neural Interface Division is going to change the world." "Is that so?" came Richard's voice from behind them. They turned to find him approaching along the ridge path, less formally dressed than he would have been 6 months ago, the rigid lines of his face softened by the genuine smile he now wore more frequently. "We're just discussing the future of the company," Mason explained, not at all embarrassed to be caught planning. "I see," Richard replied, amusement evident in his tone. "And does this future involve finishing your homework and preparing for next week's presentation to the medical board?" Ellie grimaced theatrically. "Details, details." Richard laughed, a sound that had once been so rare within the walls of Evergreen Estate, but now filled its spaces regularly. "The board won't approve our testing protocol if the presentation slides are incomplete, regardless of how brilliant the technology might be." "We'll finish them tonight," Mason promised, "right after dinner." Richard nodded, satisfied. Speaking of which, Mrs. Chen mentioned something about homemade apple pie. "Race you back," Ellie challenged, already darting down the path. Mason exchanged a look with his father, a moment of shared understanding that needed no words. Then, with renewed determination, he gripped his cane and began his own journey down the path, each step a testament to how far they had all come. Richard. Wheeler watched his son's steady progress with pride, before following at a measured pace. The fortress he had built to keep the world out had become a home where life flourished. The walls remained, but they no longer imprisoned. They sheltered and protected a family built not on blood alone, but on mutual respect, shared passion, and the courage to trust. As evening fell over Evergreen Estate, lights glowed warmly from windows once sealed shut. Inside, laughter echoed through halls once shrouded in silence. And in the dining room, 3 people who had once been alone in their separate ways shared stories and plans and dreams, connected by bonds stronger than any security system could create or break. For Mason Wheeler, who had once measured his life in clinical routines and medical reports, each day now brought new challenges and triumphs. With Ellie's ingenuity and his father's resources, the neural interface technology was advancing rapidly, offering hope to countless others with similar conditions. But more important than any technological breakthrough was the simple truth Mason had learned that first night when a girl with wild hair and a pouch of stones had climbed through his window. The strongest bridges are built on trust, and family is defined not by circumstance but by choice. In the months and years that followed, that truth would guide them through challenges and victories alike, a foundation as solid as the mountains that surrounded their home and as enduring as the bond between 2 children who had found in each other the courage to step beyond the walls that confined them. The end. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Mason and Ellie touched your heart. This tale of courage, friendship, and breaking down walls, both physical and emotional, reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood, but by the connections we choose to nurture. If you enjoyed this journey through Evergreen Estate, please consider subscribing to our channel for more emotionally captivating stories that explore the complexity of human relationships. Hit the like button if Mason and Ellie's adventure moved you, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We've created a special playlist of similar heartwarming tales about found family and unexpected connections. You can find it by clicking on the link to your left. New stories are uploaded every week, each one carefully crafted to inspire and touch your soul.